Welcome to another episode of Jabber and the Drone, the movie review podcast that politely disagrees to agree. From Portland, Oregon, you are Richard Wally.
And you are Castor Robinson from sunny California. What's up, dude?
What's up, dude?
Yeah.
What's up?
Are we ready for our pet topic?
Yeah, let's do this. Today we're going to be talking about Tusk later in the show, and I thought it might be kind of cool to, we do this every once in a while, kind of do a director's profile and talk about Kevin Smith and his body of work. We can start from the beginning if you like, and let's get some general impressions. What are sort of
Kevin
your
Smith?
of Kevin Smith?
Okay.
Yeah. What do you at this point? You know, let's say not taking into account Tusk. Let's pretend we haven't seen it.
Okay.
At this point, where are you with Kevin Smith? Where were you and where have you come?
You know, Kevin Smith's always been... I actually wasn't that into Clerks when everybody else seemed to be. I was like, it happened. But I didn't know Mallrats was by him at the same time, and I think I saw that first, and I had a fun time with that, and I really liked it, and it might have been part of that whole like comic book culture thing that I wasn't really able to get into, being from Idaho. But that was kind of my first entry. But what really I really liked from him was Dogma. That was my first really I like Kevin Smith. This is one of his best films, I think. And then later I saw Chasing Amy. And so I think that's really his big first push is really the most impressive of his career. And later on, so my big general impression is later on he kind of devolves into the Hollywood system a little bit, and I think he kind of loses his way for a little bit. But so my general thing with Kevin Smith is he's hit and miss with me. Sure.
So. And I think that's kind of how he is for everybody. Whether you're the super fan, whether you're like the hardcore indie geek Clerks, Chasing Amy fan. I think those people have a hard time with Kevin Smith's later work, or some of his stuff like Jersey Girl or whatever, or Zack and Miri. And then the people who are like really into like the raunchy dick and fart jokes stuff,
right?
Have a harder time with him when he's trying to be a little bit more serious, or when he's trying to actually say something. And so I think that generally everyone's consensus, depending on where you are with him and what you prefer from him, everybody is kind of hit and miss with Kevin Smith. I think Kevin Smith is hit and miss with Kevin Smith.
Agreed. And I think also he's kind of like, sometimes he's like super positive about himself, almost like manically so. And then sometimes he's like really not. And so sometimes I don't really, he's kind of a character, that Kevin Smith. So.
Sure. And I think, coming off of his film career, he's really kind of become this jack of all trades sort of media enterprise unto himself.
That's true.
Now he has the Smodcast Network, which is one of the most popular podcasting networks, and manages something like 12 to 13 different shows, half of which he stars in, and releases multiple episodes every week. He does the stand-up, well, it's not really stand-up, but the spoken word stuff that he became very well known for.
Well, does he do movie reviews in those? I'm not really terribly familiar with this stuff when it comes to the
he had a show on Hulu for a little while, or Amazon Prime, one or the other, called Spoilers, which was kind of a movie review show where he would pay 20 different people in Hollywood, just street people, to go watch a movie with him. Then they would take him back to the studio and they'd discuss the movie. I think that was a short-lived project. I don't know if he still does that.
I did.
But that was one of the many things he was doing all at once. He's one of those guys who I think purposely stays busy so that he doesn't have to actually stop and breathe and reflect.
Right.
Because I mean, it's hard to talk about Kevin Smith and his movies without talking about him as a person, because when he started out, and we can get into talking about his actual movies, when he started out, he was a very, very personal filmmaker and very autobiographical.
I think
And a
he
lot
sort
of
of
what he
is
was,
and still in a way, but
in a way, yeah, even when he doesn't think he's being.
mm-hmm.
Um, so let's go ahead and get into Clerks. Clerks is his first film he released. It came out in 1994. Made for practically nothing. He maxed out something like 7 credit cards. He dropped out of film school, hired a couple friends who were willing to work for free, and was shot in middle of nowhere, New Jersey, at the store he was still working at, shooting at night after doing 8-hour shifts working in the day to pay for the movie. And kind of by accident, it ends up being seen by the right people and gets the Sundance treatment, and he kind of becomes a cult phenomenon. And I like Clerks quite a bit, and to some degree, you know, for everything you can say it doesn't work in the movie, some of the acting is very amateurish. It's not shot particularly well. And it feels like somebody's first movie, and it feels like, you know, it's indie back when that meant something.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, you know, I'll be talking about Skeleton Twins later. That's technically an indie film, but it looks like anything you'd see on TV now. Back then, when you were an independent filmmaker, that meant nobody was helping you, and it was going to look as good as you could afford to make it look.
Correct.
And I there's something about that. There's a kind of a punk rock energy to that movie that I really respond to. I kind of like the flaws. I kind of like how grainy it is. I kind of like every once in a while when the actor flubs a line.
Mm-hmm.
When they're trying to like choke down these, you know, pages and pages and pages of Kevin Smith dialogue. And it is a movie that's primarily just people standing around talking. And that's how most people would agree where Kevin Smith excels.
And you know, I think in some of his later films, I think he pulls it off better. For some reason, that film, I mean, there are parts of it that I'm entertained in, and there are parts of it that I'm really bored. So it's kind of a mixed. It always has left me with mixed feelings. And I've always tried to be into it, but or I've given it a good try. I guess I should say, not try to be into it. But
Yeah.
it's just been one of his that I'm just kind of like, eh.
You don't respond as much.
Not really. I don't get a whole lot out of it. I do agree with everything you've said about it.
Yeah.
But the overall,
You don't even get like kind of a charge out of the I don't know, I guess sort of the small town boy makes good kind of hero story of it all.
I don't
As an
think so.
aspiring writer artist, that you don't find that
Well, oh, you're
inspiring?
saying him as a person, not the story.
Well, yeah, I mean, the extra textual stuff that happens with that movie. I think it's kind of it's interesting to see somebody so young. I think he was 24 when he wrote the script and filmed it when he was about 26.
Right.
To see that he just got this thing made, you know, and with no help at all from any kind of real
Film
studio.
person, right?
Yeah, and it's exactly the movie he wanted to make. And to some degree, it's still his purest film.
I see. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
To a degree, yes, and I see what you're saying also because being his purest film, it's not through a studio system. It's not through.
There's no fan base yet. He's not trying to appease or disappoint or worry about disappointing anybody.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like I said, I can see what you're saying on a contextual level.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't make the film that satisfying to me.
Sure. Well, so you responded more to Mallrats.
I did, and I mean, I haven't seen it for a number of years, but when I was a kid, and again, maybe it was the comic book stuff, like, truthfully.
Right.
Also, it was, I mean, the Dick and Fart jokes, movies, all that kind of stuff.
There was. This one was released a few years later. This was his first studio gig. And some would argue, probably even he would argue, that he was not really up for the challenge yet. He did get a lot of notes that he took. The tone is quite a bit lighter than Clerks. There's not as much dramatic beats, even though there's a lot of similarities to the characters in Clerks and sort of what they're going through, relationship issues and whatever.
Well, he kind of does the Marvel thing before Marvel did it. But I mean, he's totally stealing from comic books in a lot of ways. But...
Yeah, he creates a movie universe.
Right.
Tarantino kind of did that a little bit too.
Correct.
Not as explicitly, but yeah, the Viewist universe of these characters that all sort of live in this area of New Jersey, and they know each other and they talk about each other tangentially from film to film.
Right.
I like this movie. I think that I did like it more when I was younger.
Right. I haven't seen it since I was young, so that might be like I said, this is the film that kind of turned me on to Kevin Smith. I didn't know it was a Kevin Smith film, really.
Right. It kind of became one of those films you would see terribly edited on USA without any kind of notion of what it is.
like Showtime and Cinemax and some of those, so that's where I saw it first.
Oh, okay.
Or one of the HBO or something like that.
Yeah,
so.
Famously it bombed in the box office. It was supposed to be his big, calling card, and it ended up not really being that. But it did have a huge cult following. I think largely because of, we think of the world of geek chic, which is what we live in now. This whole idea that, there's probably a whole generation of people, 12 years old or younger, who they've never known a world where being in the comic books made you unpopular.
Well, I don't know if it made you unpopular. I was always into it, but...
But you know what I mean. There was
they were unpopular, and it wasn't really something that was...
It wasn't a cool thing.
It wasn't a cool, and it wasn't part of just mainstream culture.
No, but Kevin Smith and his popularity and the sort of the way he presented comic book lovers and pop culture geeks, sort of was a prototype for the geek chic world we live in.
That's true, and also, I mean, with Mallrats too, he kind of probably showed it more accurate, not like these super... Not every comic book person was the super, like, nerd who...
Yeah.
I mean, the Brody, the character specifically, I think I got his name right.
Played by Jason Lee.
Yeah. He was very, like a slacker in a lot of those things, but he was, and had his own things. And I guess a loser in his own sense, but he wasn't like necessarily nerdy. He could talk to people, and he had a girlfriend. He had
a good, I mean, he's kind of breaking up with her, but he has a good looking girlfriend, and it's not like a weird thing. It's not like, whoa, this isn't real.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, in a way, I think you are right. Maybe this was, I mean, a lot of the prototype for the geek chic kind of came out of the early 90s, I think it definitely, like all those cartoons, also programmed us at a very young age to be like, oh yeah, superheroes.
Right.
But his next film, did you have more to say about Mallrats?
I didn't. Sorry. Yeah, I was going to go right into Chasing Amy.
Cool. Well, his next film, Chasing Amy, on the other hand, is very serious. It kind of goes back, it kind of harkens back to, I say, with Clerks, but he's a little more polished. He knows exactly what he wants to say in the film. And, I mean, he uses all of his actors really well. And, I mean, I think this comes out just a little bit before the Ben Affleck thing exploded and then imploded. But
it predates Good Will Hunting by a couple years.
Right. So
it came out in 97. So actually probably just like barely 6 months to a year before he would blow up as a person.
And honestly, it also kind of goes into gay culture and slut shaming and a lot of things before it became popular or really even
in the zeitgeist.
Yeah. So I think that there's some kudos there for that. I mean, besides being, politically like, a pat on the head, like it's just a good film, and he talks about people in a real way, and they aren't
in a complicated way. He doesn't let the characters off the hook for anything. Like the main drive of the story is that a man falls in love with a lesbian, and after that comes to fruition, it complicates all the other relationships in his life, and it's a romantic comedy, but it's kind of a very somber and melancholy one, and it's funny in all the ways you like Kevin Smith to be funny, and in some ways some of his sharpest comedic dialogue, but it's with a much more pointed perspective than he normally has, or sometimes he kind of runs off the rails sometimes in some of his ideas. And this one, because he's telling such a personal story, and he's kind of reacting against the studio system that sort of failed him. I feel like this is sort of this perfect storm of a movie. Really good script, just the right budget. It's not too low, it's not too high. The actors are all there to do their work. They're not fucking around. No studio interference. So it's just in another way, like Clerks, I think it's just a very pure film, and I still think his best film.
I think it's his best film. I wouldn't say it's my favorite of his films, but
Right.
again, I haven't gone back to his films, and I need to some of them, specifically Chasing Amy and Dogma. I need to go back to, but Chasing Amy, I think, yeah, and it also kind of goes into that the nerd world still because his lead characters, but he shoots them in a more realistic way.
Yeah, it's not slapsticky.
They're humans.
The core of the story isn't about their interests.
Right.
It's just informs who they are.
Exactly. But yeah, no, I think Chasing Amy is very compelling and great. See, I thought it was always weird that people considered it a comedy. I always considered it a very good drama. So.
Yeah, or both.
Or both. That's fair.
Dogma, I think, is one we both really like.
Oh yeah, I mean, just at the satirical level, but also dealing with beliefs in general. And I don't think that it's overly for somebody who's ex-Catholic and I don't think he's overly mean about anything.
No,
and that's something I like when people deal with religion and beliefs is when they're they're honest about how they have severe doubts, but they're also this is part of our world. So
right. And actually, some people have argued that the film is pretty devout. Because it takes all of the Catholic tenets very seriously, even though it's presupposing this sort of comedic end of the world scenario.
Yeah.
And it's taking everything to these logical extremes to make a satirical point. The movie still...
I think he gives special thanks to Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. Yeah.
Pratchett for Good Omens,
which I
think was a big influence. The comic books in general less informs the characters, but I think informs the milieu of the movie and the story. I think you can kind of get hints of Preacher in that movie as well.
I can see I can see that. Yeah, I mean, I definitely see Good Omens in it, and some of how the characters are treated, and definitely how the people talk. It's not the exact same story, but it's almost like set in the same universe, just in America and not Britain, or the United Kingdom, excuse me. But it's, yeah, no, I do this film. I think it hits everything. I think this is my favorite of his films. It's something I need to go back to, but to me, this hit everything that was good about Kevin Smith. His humor, satire, good dialogue, and a little bit
good
of drama
characters.
And serious and dealing with ideas. And that's what I like about the film. The only thing I disliked about the film isn't really a real dislike. It's more of a preference. I didn't really like the shit monsters, but that's just because I've never been into that, even though it was kind of funny. So
again, it's sort of a comic booky thing. And I think that, and in that context, it sort of makes a little more sense. And actually, the implications of a monster being made from the excrement of the people killed on Golgotha is a really dark idea. It's just kind of played for laughs.
Yeah, but that's a very Preacher-esque kind of thing.
That's a very, very Preacher-esque thing. But I think that my issue with the movie is it starts to, and he actually wrote this before he wrote Clerks. I just couldn't afford to make it as his first film, but I think it runs off the rails a little. I think there's a few too many characters, and the Linda Florentino character, who's the main character, who's struggling with her faith, I think her perspective gets a little diluted by the middle of the movie after we've introduced all these other people on her odyssey.
Sure.
But I think that the movie as a whole, and it kind of ends in sort of a dopey way, but I think the movie as a whole is really interesting, and it's a very conflicted film, kind of like Chasing Amy. I think I consider the two very similar, from his point of view as a director at that point.
Sure.
Kind of a young, angry director. let's try and move some of these other ones along a little bit faster here. But Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, I consider an hour and a half of fan service.
Agreed. I mean, I think he had fun, and I think sometimes I personally think it's okay for a director to just kind of be like, okay, I made a comedy, but it's not.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say it's necessarily that interesting. I liked it when I was a teenager.
agreed. I think it's funny in the ways that you can depend on Kevin Smith being funny.
Mm.
Good dialogue, blah blah blah. But there's no point of view. It feels very, very much like pandering. I think he wanted to get out of this style of filmmaking. He wanted to leave these characters behind, and he tried to do it in this big send off, and send up. And it is that, and as a button on the Viewisk universe, it serves its purpose until he decides to reopen it later. Then it really makes it feel tangential and annoying.
Fair enough.
But it's fine. It's certainly not his worst film. I don't think it's anywhere near his best. But there's about, I don't know, 7-8 good chuckles in it.
Sure.
Jersey Girl. This was the first movie he tried to do outside of the Viewisk universe, and flopped miserably because of the Ben Affleck, Jennifer Lopez stuff, which most of it got cut out of the movie. It's very much a straightforward PG-13 romantic comedy, and it feels light and a little airless. I don't think it's as bad as some people make it out to be, though.
I saw it, I think, actually with you.
Yeah, back in the real theater days.
Yeah, but I do not remember a single thing about it. Like, not a single thing, Cassidy. I haven't seen it since. I haven't revisited it. Don't know. I haven't either. Thing.
I remember a little bit about it. I remember basically my general impressions of it were it was cute.
I remember I went and saw it with you.
It was fine. But yeah, I think it was one of those things, the more you come away from it, the less you remember about it, the less there is to say about it. And maybe it get marred by studio interference because of the, trying to cut out as much Bennifer as possible.
Sure.
And I've heard that the longer cut works better. Maybe that's the case. But as a whole, it kind of just feels like a little bit like him spinning around in circles. And to some degree, I kind of felt like he's kind of been there since. Huh. He's had a hard time finding his directorial energy.
So he tried to blow up this universe he created, and then has gone in circles since. Yeah, I don't know. I really cannot tell you one thing about the movie. Not that,
and that's fair. That's fair. I know he was influenced a little bit by John Hughes's Curly Sue. And that point in John Hughes's career when he was trying to sort of not be the Brat Pack guy anymore. And I don't know if that was the best point of inspiration.
Fair enough.
Clerks 2 was the film he made because he promised Jason Mewes that if he got off drugs, he would make him another Clerks movie. And because Jersey Girl did so bad that he lost all confidence in being able to do anything outside of the Viewisk universe. With that said, I think Clerks 2 is just about as good as we could have ever hoped for. It's not great. I don't know if it's the sequel we wanted, but it maybe was the one we deserved.
Never saw it.
You never saw Clerks 2?
No, not once.
I would say watch it. It's much more of a straightforward comedy than the first Clerks. Obviously, it has a much bigger budget. If you like the characters, you can get through it. Dante and Randall are some of his best characters, and I think Jeff Anderson delivers Kevin Smith dialogue just about as good as anybody. And it's a lot more jokey, and it's a lot more polished and a little bit tighter than the scrappy punk rock energy of the first Clerks. So maybe in that regard you would enjoy it more. I do think it runs off the rails. There's a few too many characters. And it feels a little bit, has that kind of Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back-ish fan service stuff.
Okay.
But it also has its moments where it's some of the best stuff he's ever done.
Hmm.
There's about 4 or 5 scenes in the movie that stand up right next to anything off of Chasing Amy or Dogma. It's just in a film that is a little misguided from the start. But I defend Clerks 2 for what it is. It's not great, but I think it is, like I said, just about as good as we could have hoped for from a completely unnecessary sequel.
Okay. I will say, I haven't seen the next film either. I have not seen Zack and Mary Make It Work.
That is, to date, my least favorite Kevin Smith movie.
And I think that's... I've never been... I mean, I like comedies. Everybody should like at least a few, you know, and have a sense of humor. But it's never been one of my favorite genres. And I basically, there's a few opinions I kind of talked to, and all of them pretty much had a consensus on this, and I just didn't see it.
That's interesting, because I actually sometimes I feel alone in this opinion. Like, there's a lot of people who really like that movie. I think it is one of his most desperate films. I think he was losing identity as a filmmaker, and he wanted to kind of make a View Askew-ish movie, but he didn't want to explicitly do that, so to prove people that he could be the director he hoped he could ever be. And in doing so, tries to remind everyone to like him again by employing the Apatow crowd to deliver his dialogue and kind of say, hey, there wouldn't be a fucking Judd Apatow if it wasn't for me. Which is true, but it's also feels like the snake eating its own tail a lot of the time. I don't think it's that funny. The plot doesn't really make all that much sense. There's the sexual politics are really kind of backwards and confusing. And it's just not good. I just didn't like it at all. I came away with it with a very bad taste in my mouth. Even the points where he's trying to be emotional and he's trying to, like, you know, return back to like the Chasing Amy type of thing. It is just really bad at doing that, and it comes off as more sentimental than anything. I just feel like I think it's his most misbegotten film. Now, I did not see his next film, which is almost universally hated, Cop Out.
Yeah, I didn't see it either.
So we don't have to talk about it.
Yeah, so these are the last three I have not seen. So let's just pretend it didn't happen.
Right. Which is pretty easy.
Yeah. Now, his next film, though, Red State, that, on the other hand, I did see, and I actually quite liked it.
Red State is a different creature altogether.
It is. It's not. It doesn't feel like a Kevin Smith movie, really.
No, every once in a while you're reminded in some of the dialogue, but
correct.
He's really... He kind of seems freed up in a way, like sort of in the same way he was with Chasing Amy, where he just puts his hands in the air and he says, I don't know what anybody wants, and so I'm going to just make this.
And you know what? I think it's an angry movie, and I think...
It is.
I don't... You know, I'm not sure what it's supposed to all be doing completely, but I enjoyed it.
It's a little bit of a mess. It's kind of frustrating. But it's also it's interesting. It has traction. It has dramatic traction. It's a horror film, which he's never done before. And it's kind of, it's satirical, sort of in a Dogma-ish way sometimes.
But,
and, you know...
However, I don't think it ever slips into comedy.
Not pure comedy. No, he's never playing it for broad laughs. But there are...
Well, comedic moments... comedic moments are not...
It's sort of blackly humorous.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, I'll give you that, but I'm just saying it doesn't slip into that more lighter...
No, characters don't start talking about Star Wars.
No, and it doesn't slip in... There's a lot of things that, you know, people would identify as him don't exist in this film. You know,
right.
The comic book angles, all that kind of stuff, non-existent. And so, I really enjoyed the film. It was definitely very angry. I thought the performances were great, though. But it was kind of a different side of Kevin Smith that I don't think we've really seen. And I think a lot of people straight up... I think there's a lot of hatred out there for this film because it wasn't a movie that a lot of these audiences could like. But I think that some other people could really, a certain type of horror fan could really be into this, and maybe
Right.
not expecting it. So
Agreed. I think it's in certainly not his best film if you just want to take into account, all of the boxes that should be ticked or whatever. But I think that it is one of his most interesting films. And I think that it is really one of his most ambitious films. It's shot different than he normally shoots a movie. It's not all done in, heads and shoulders two shots and it's really handheld and kind of visceral and has some very impactful violence, and it's about the Westboro Baptist Church, kind of a satirical send off of that cult. And it's dealing with American politics and faith and religion and gun culture and all of this stuff, and it kind of comes together in this kind of haphazard way, but it's it's all about ideas, which is from him at this point is refreshing.
agreed. And see, I don't think it's as I found it pretty easy to follow just as a movie, as a story. I didn't think that it really had as many problems as that. I do agree with the ideas being a
Hmm.
little messy, but it's just about this crazy church
Right.
basically abducting these people and murdering them and having these crazy ideas. And I don't know. I think that there's a lot to like about the film, really. And I mean, from definitely not if you're in there for some dick and
Dick and
fart
fart
jokes,
jokes.
but
Yeah.
that's not what that film was, or who it was made for. And so I thought it was interesting that he just kind of did a movie that wasn't really trying to be Kevin Smith, but just trying to do another type of movie in general
Right.
that he obviously does enjoy.
Right. I mean, no, a lot of people don't really talk about this, but the original concept for Clerks was not supposed to be a slacker comedy.
Mm,
It was he originally wrote it to be a Lynchian story about a convenience store where these strange people come in all night and talk to him, and it was supposed to be like this more surreal kind of thing, and it kind of got diffused through his natural comedic voice.
mm.
But I think there is a place in Kevin Smith where he has these kind of artsy leanings that he doesn't ever afford to himself.
Right. And I mean, I've heard in different interviews where he is kind of harsh about that whole thing. Like I don't know. It is kind of one of those things that kind of gets befuddled into general high art versus low art kind of thing. But
Uh-huh.
and I think he's generally interested in. I think he's a big movie fan, and he's
Yeah.
into movie. But he's one of those guys. He's into movie like ideas and movie theory, but
Yeah.
he what the problem is that he's one of those guys that likes low, like the lowest of low, and he likes some kind of bad movies, but he also likes some of the great movies. And so
Right.
you kind of get that mix with him. And I think that's actually something that makes him um,
Interesting.
interesting and worth watching, because
Right.
you get that
I
that mix.
you do. And I think that my issues with him, and I kind of, said this a little bit already, is that I think he's a very self-conscious filmmaker.
Hmm.
And for better or worse, whether he's making a very personal film to please himself, or whether he's making a film based upon what he thinks other people think about him at that moment. And a lot of times he gets in the way of himself by either not knowing what he wants or misjudging what other people want.
Right.
Um, and the best movies he makes is when he's able to have some amount of clarity and not think about those external factors. But those feel like anymore, those feel like rare occurrences.
Well, I think it's hard when I mean anymore too, like being so interconnected like we are.
Yes, and he's become like, Kevin Smith isn't like, one of these kind of shadowy, mysterious directors. He has put himself in the public. He is a celebrity director.
Yeah, agreed.
So everybody talks about him in these like we know him like we're doing right now. We're talking like we know the dude and we don't.
Hmm.
Um, but that's because he's put himself there. He's positioned himself to be judged that way.
Well, he's always been very upfront and very candid.
Right.
So it just makes you, and I don't pretend to know him at a personal level, but it just seems like, watching the trajectory and watching himself talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
If he wasn't in the spotlight so much, maybe
Right.
I'd have a different opinion. So
Yeah. Um, do you want to go into Tusk, or do you want me to cover Skeleton Twins first?
no, let's just move into Tusk. I think it'd be awkward to not.
Yeah. Uh, do you want to set it up?
Sure, why not? So getting out of all of his past films, we're going to be reviewing this week's Tusk that just recently came out. This film is about a podcaster that goes out and he interviews people and for his podcast, and then he comes back and talks with his co-host about his interviews and what it was like and what these people were like. And kind of what you kind of learn about the character at a more personal level is that he used to be a really sweet, nice guy. And then then his persona took over and he became kind of a jerk. Now, this movie kind of slides into a lot of different territories, and then later he kind of wanders into Canada and kind of ends up wandering into this kind of horror mad scientist person, serial killer fellow who wants to turn him into a walrus. That's not a spoiler. That's exactly what the trailer says.
Yeah,
and
and this is based on an anecdote that came out of one of his podcasts.
right, and he cites that, and the film devolves further into almost being like a Coen-esque kind of movie, but like a bad parody of one. Like if the Scary Movie people made a parody of a Coen Brothers film. Um,
Ooh.
this film is kind of a mess. It really is.
Kind of.
Okay, it's just a mess. You've got me. I don't need to hide behind anything. It's a mess. But I'm a little more positive, I think, than most people about it. I think it's a mess, but I think that even though tonally it shifts like 3,000 times, and there's definitely stuff to throw away, I still think it's a very strange, because it's a hard thing for me too, because I'm not completely decided on it, if I completely reject it or if I think that there's some saving graces to it. Now, okay, so the younger actors, Justin Long, Haley Joel Osment, Genesis Rodriguez, all these people, right? They play it more like a drama and a horror movie, like straight up. I mean, Justin Long plays in the comedy realm a little bit, but more like a wisecracker kind of person.
Yeah, Justin Long is essentially doing his version of a Jason Lee, Kevin Smith character.
Right. And then you've got Michael Parks, who is playing straight horror. Not, I wouldn't say that comedic. I wouldn't say anything. I would say straight horror. And then, well, he kind of makes these weird little references to like things like Clerk, where they go into a Canadian store and there's these two that are behind the counter. And actually, one's played by his daughter and the other one's played by the daughter of Johnny Depp. I thought that was kind of strange when I learned. And then you devolve into the worst part of the film to me is when it devolves into the strange Johnny Depp character fellow.
Right.
And
playing a Quebecian private eye.
And it's kind of, and I do think he's making a weird, like, offshoot of, like, a Fargo kind of thing, but badly.
But not doing it very well.
And then you've got the weird, like, bizarro element of, Justin Long being in this walrus thing. And then by the end, it is sort of surreal, and it's kind of, so I don't know, the general ideas of the film I think are kind of interesting, like this man or beast kind of thing that he goes into, and it's specifically being about kind of...
Oh, you're going to tell me what it's about, because I have no fucking idea what this movie's about. Go ahead, please.
Okay, cool. That's what I think, if you're just following the Justin Long character, and we don't devolve into the other stuff,
Right.
It's about his transformation from being this nicer, better fellow into this mutant of sorts.
Getting lost in a persona.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what happens through that character's arc, that specific character.
Yeah.
Michael Parks, the Howard Howe, villainous character. I mean, I think he plays it straight horror 1, too. I think that he's kind of a weird stand-in but it gets really muddled and convoluted and becomes, he's kind of a church character, kind of an old world character, kind of like old ideas encroaching on this younger generation. And then also, I think he kind of stands in a little bit for the studio. So it's completely convoluted and kind of doesn't work in some ways, but as a performance, I think works really well.
Okay.
And then the Johnny Depp thing is so bad, and especially when it goes into the flashback, I was like not even paying attention. I was like, this is just fucking stupid. This is horrible.
Yeah, that scene needed to hit the cutting room floor. Bad.
Now, the Genesis Rodriguez, that's the girlfriend character in the Haley Joel Osment, the Teddy, the co-host, the podcast host. There isn't really developed, and you don't know. It doesn't really explicitly say like, are they completely cheating or emotionally cheating? And I think it kind of misleads both directions. Like, what does it do?
I don't think the movie's that interested.
I think it is at parts.
No, it pretends to be. It feels like there was an edit somewhere.
Yeah.
Like there was maybe 25 pages about these characters that didn't make it to the movie.
Or maybe made it or didn't make it through the editing booth.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there, but those characters are...
It was very serious.
Frustratingly vague.
Well, I think besides that, besides a little vague, I do agree with that. I do think that there was kind of a really serious note hit there. And that's that's one of the strange shifts it takes. And I think the format of the film at the start is very interesting. And I think throughout the house, the part where I completely am lost is the Guy Lapointe, Johnny Depp character. So that's, in a nutshell, I don't really know what to think about the movie. I found it strange. I found some parts really do work well and some don't at all. And it's just a bizarre... It's also very much like... It's very much hitching off of like the Human Centipede kind of stuff.
Right.
And kind of playing in that horror comedy range, but kind of, it's kind of like he only knows how to do one or the other. He doesn't know how to blend the two flavors.
Awkward proportions.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you pretty much summed it up. I think I ultimately, when I came out of the movie, I sort of appreciated the experience, the bizarreness of it all, the I can't believe I'm actually watching this in a mainstream theater kind of experience.
Well, the Walrus,
like, is
like, if I read that in a book, like, I'd be okay with it, like, I could accept it, but as soon as you see that fucking thing, it's ridiculous. Like,
very much so, yeah. And I mean, and I think the movie knows that.
Yeah.
I think the movie is working on a kind of black humor way. The movie is, even Michael Parks, he's playing it seriously, but it's almost so seriously that it drifts into camp.
Oh no!
And I think he means that. I think he knows what movie he's in.
No, I agree. I think it becomes almost like a old school kind of
Hammer Vincent Price-ish
That's
character.
What I was about to say.
Yeah,
Hammer Films kind of villain, but very seriously. And I don't discredit that performance. I think that's one of the best performances in there.
Well, Michael Parks is such a professional, and he's honestly, he's better than this movie, and he's better than some of the directors he's worked with. But my issue with the movie as a whole is I feel like it's kind of like Red State in that he's so full of ideas, and they're less thematic ideas than Red State and more just visual and genre ideas this time
Mm-hmm.
around. You know, he wants to do kind of a broad sort of dark Coen Brothers sort of comedy, but he also wants to do sort of a torture porn parody, but he also kind of wants to like bring in his podcasting persona. And this movie is like really on the nose about I do podcasts now, and that this is who I'm trying to redefine myself as.
Hmm.
Um, and the Justin, I mean, you can see the obvious parallels between the Justin Long character and Kevin Smith as a person.
Yeah.
And to some degree, he's using this movie to sort of critique himself or the perception of himself by others.
Yeah.
I think the actual parallel that the movie isn't as aware of is that he's a little bit more like the Michael Parks character here, and that he's created this beast of a thing that's made from a patchwork of incoherent ideas, and he's trying to awkwardly fight against it. Um, it's it is a it's unlike anything you'll see this year, I'm sure.
It's a
And for
strange...
that alone, that is a reason to see it.
No, and that's kind of why I don't completely discredit it. It's not a good movie, I can say that.
No.
And I would personally prefer the Johnny Depp character cut out. And,
Completely.
Yeah, completely.
Who's kind of doing this weird sort of Peter Sellers-esque thing.
Right. But then add in more about the Allie and the Teddy character, these other his
Right.
girlfriend and friend. What's going
And I
on
think
with
both
them
of those
and why?
people, I think Kevin Smith sort of chuckled at the idea of like, oh, I'll find Haley Joel Osment. What he's doing, I'm gonna go find him and I'm gonna put him in my movie because I already have this weird stew of things. I might as well throw Haley Joel Osment in it. I don't think he's really up for the challenge here. I don't think we're there with this actor now. So he just sticks out like a sore thumb. You're just looking at like how much he's changed and like you never really get into the character. And then on top of that, there's not much of a character for him to be. So you never really get past the point of why is Haley Joel Osment in this movie?
See, and I feel like that there is kind of something going on in the background, but I don't feel like it's exploited, so you don't really get it. I mean, besides him not being a child anymore, like
Right.
I think that's more of a bias than anything, like for people watching it, and it's obviously going to happen.
No, it is.
But I don't think he does a terrible job himself.
No, he's not ruining the movie and he's giving it his all. I just think it was a misbegotten casting choice given what the character needs to do with as little as they have.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If they
you need
had
somebody who
more.
can work with more economy
Right.
and somebody, just a good comedic actor to come in there and do it, not stunt casting.
Right. I think that you have kind of a point, but I think if there was more to do with the character, both characters really, I think they
Yeah.
would fit in the film fine. I actually think the worst note and the thing that doesn't make it is, we've already talked about it way too much, but is the whole Guy Lapuente ridiculous Johnny Depp thing.
I get what he was trying to do with that character, and I get what the movie was trying to do as a whole.
Right.
With integrating that. There is a certain amount of the absurdity of everything kind of hits a critical mass by the 75% mark.
Right.
Of the movie, and by that point, I was getting a little bored. And even with all of the weirdness, I was kind of I had gotten to a point where I felt like there wasn't being told anything anymore. I'd gotten whatever I was supposed to get out of everything, and I was left with kind of a so what by the end of it.
Kind of,
And
yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's because I tuned out so much during some of those scenes because I was like, this is fucking horrible. Like that was just that was just the voice constantly in my head. It was like, this is bad. This is really, really bad. What is this doing here?
Right.
See, I can still connect. Maybe that's why, because I had that voice just like yelling at the top of its lungs inside my head.
Yeah.
I can still connect the Justin Long storyline throughout the whole thing and say,
No,
oh,
I
there's
can
that.
too, and I think given what he's supposed to do in the movie, I think he's decent, and actually, even like during the darkest scenes, he's still able to bring sort of a touch of humor to it, and I think that
But also
there are moments
drama
of
at
genuine kind of disturbing horror.
Well, there is even a moment in Disturbing Horror when he's in the walrus suit.
Yeah.
and he kind of sinks down, and there's other things around him, you know.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I think that's uh, a fairly interesting. Um, I think it's an interesting mess. I guess that's where I'm going. If you're into
Yeah.
Kevin Smith or horror or just a strange experience or whatever, I think that maybe would be interested in this film.
My
Uh,
issue,
I
my problems with it is,
hesitance, but
yeah, hesitant for sure. Like I said, it's unlike anything you'll see this year. It's unique in its own bizarre way. I think there is an element of it where it's trying a little too hard. I think it wants to be a midnight movie a little too
and
much.
I think
And
that fits in with the general milieu of those kind of movies, though, like
no, well,
the
but that's what I'm
human
saying.
centipede and
There's
those kind of things.
yeah, but I think there's a sincerity to the way those films are made where this is a little too smart alecky to fit in with that.
And I see, and I think he kind of takes some of his film knowledge and kind of adds in a weird flavor. I don't know. I'm so drawn because I want to agree with you, but I want to disagree with you. It's a strange. This movie has me when it actually comes to how I felt about it. Like I can talk about the different parts fine with somebody,
Right.
but when it comes to my
You want to root
actual
for it because it is so unique and it's such a ride.
well, partly that, but it's I think yeah, it's it's a chin scratcher for sure. Whether I liked or disliked, but there are some definite uh, there are some great there's some great polished, wonderful parts in it, and then there's
Hmm.
some really rough things that really just like cut you up.
It needed an edit. It needed a second pass on the script. There's it needed some amount of control. Someone needed to come in and say, "Listen, you got a lot of stuff here. Half of it doesn't work. You know, narrow your scope a little."
Right.
Um, but in the grand scheme of things, in this conversation on Kevin Smith in general, it fits into his oeuvre in an interesting way because of the self-reflexive
Well, it's
content.
definitely it's weird because of Red State and how angry that
Yeah,
film was. So
and this is
it takes from that new kind of that
energy.
new energy, but at the same time, I think it's a good energy, honestly. However, it kind of mixes parts from every part of his career, whether it's
Yeah,
the Clerks days, the Chasing Amy days, the Cop Out days, the Jersey Girl days, the Red
yeah.
State days. It mixes all of these things, and so and it does mix those personal things, and that's why in general it's almost like a retrospective. It's just messy and kind of
Hmm.
so I don't know. I I don't know. If you're interested, go see the film.
Yeah.
If you're not interested, don't go see the film. I don't know what to tell you.
And that's, I think, about as positive as a review that people can really expect from it. And to some degree, I think that's the movie he wanted to make. I think he is totally fine with people having no idea what to say about it.
I